Today on the Hot Zone, Russian nuclear bombers land in Venezuela. That can't be good. CIA mind control for dogs. And more Germans looking for guns, but not the kind of guns you think. It's Wednesday, December 12th. I'm Chuck Holton, and this is the Hot Zone Podcast.
Welcome to the Hot Zone Podcast with Chuck Holton, an experienced war correspondent who has covered wars and disasters for more than 15 years. Holton gives you a rundown of what the media isn't telling you about crisis around the world and lets you join him in doing something positive to help those who need it the most. Come along and engage with the news in a whole new way with Chuck Holton in the Hot Zone.
Thanks for being with us. So let's start with the weirdest news I've seen lately. Documents obtained by a Freedom of Information Act request show that the CIA experimented on mind control for dogs as part of its controversial MK Ultra program, which ran for 20 years starting in 1953. Now, according to the report, 6 dogs were implanted with electrodes directly into their brains, which allowed researchers to control their movements. Now, this was part of a larger program of mind control experiments, some of which were conducted illegally on unsuspecting American citizens. The covert human testing was done using drugs like LSD, and other experiments were conducted also to find ways to mass hypnotize large audiences. Of course, now we have Facebook, so there you go. Your tax dollars at work, maybe. This wasn't the only time the U.S. government conducted tests using unwitting U.S. citizens as subjects. Right here in Panama, there was a program which began in 1943 to test mustard gas and nerve agent on U.S. troops in a tropical environment. Many of them weren't told what they were getting into. The military initially looked at the Panamanian island of Coiba, but the presence of a penal colony there complicated matters, so eventually they decided on one of the Pearl Islands, San Jose. Today, that's a beach resort, and I dare say most of the people enjoying the resort there probably have no idea the island was once home to U.S. troops who were being sprayed with nerve agent. That's exciting. As some of you might know, I've done lots of research on the island of Coiba here in Panama, and one day I'm going to write the history of that island. I just keep finding more and more stuff about it. One of my novels is set on the island, but the more research I've done there, the more I realize the true history of that island is crazier than anything I could make up. So here's a trailer I made for an expedition we have planned once we can put all the pieces together to do it right. There's this incredibly beautiful tropical island. It was once the home of Panama's worst criminals. The island is malevolent. It wants to kill you. Thousands of men who were sent there were never heard from again. Now, there's nothing there but ruins. They say there's an ancient city somewhere in the dark heart of the island, and we're going to go find it. Coiba was a penal colony for about 100 years, but today it's a marine biological preserve and a World Heritage Site. I first found out about the island during the invasion of Panama, when we were sent to the island to recover some political prisoners who had been imprisoned there by the Panamanian dictator Manuel Noriega. The prison was closed in 2004, and today it looks like a paradise, but let me tell you, when you're there, it seems like everything on that island wants to kill you. Suffice it to say that it's one of the most adventurous places I've ever been, and if you ever get a chance to go, I highly recommend it. But don't just go to the beach, go around and go to the restricted zone where the prison used to be. It's amazing. Now, Let's go on to Germany. German press is reporting that citizens are requesting weapons permits at a rate more than double of last year, and more than 600,000 have been issued in the last year. News reports cite, quote, perceptions of insecurity, and in that phrase you can kind of read some of the inherent bias in the reporting against people being able to protect themselves. The truth is that crime has increased in Germany and across Europe as millions of migrants have flooded in from war-torn countries. There's been an especially big increase in sexual assaults, which I talked about yesterday on the show. So it isn't the perception of insecurity, that's the reality. Unfortunately, Germans are not allowed to defend themselves with lethal force or even by injuring an assailant. When I was in Germany earlier this year, I visited one German gun store and found out the truth. Germans aren't getting permits to carry guns. They're getting permits to carry toys. So we found this really cool gun store here in Berlin, and they've got all sorts of firearms in the cases here, but as it turns out, none of them are real. This Glock that I'm holding, Glock 17, is actually an airsoft replica, licensed airsoft replica, and this is the owner of the store, Pavel.
Hello.
Pavel, Chuck Holton. So tell me a little bit about the kinds of weapons that you have in this store.
So we have the blank pistols, we have air guns, air rifles, airsoft. It's mostly what we sell and what is possible legally in Germany.
Is it difficult to get a real firearm in Germany?
Yes, it's really very difficult. You need a special license, and only hunters, shooters, sport shooting or collectors can do it.
And so if you did get a weapon, can you carry it for self-defense?
No, it's absolutely forbidden. It's not possible. Only for police or special security forces.
Wow. So you said these are blank fire guns?
Yes. Yes.
They shoot blanks?
Yes, they shoot
so
blanks.
They just make noise. It's like a movie
Noise, or you can shoot it with CS or pepper gas.
They have a little pepper gas round that you get.
Yes.
And that's what you get for self-defense?
Yes, it's only the only weapon, as a pistol, which you can use for self-defense, and you can buy it to have it at home, but if you want to carry it on the street, you need a special license.
And all it does is make noise?
Yes, yes.
Right. So you can scare the bad guy, but that's about it. Or surprise him, if nothing else.
Yes.
So in the last few years, you've had over 1 million migrants come in illegally into Germany. How has that affected the demand for self-defense products?
Yes, it seems to be a big problem, and a lot of people were afraid. So all blank pistols, all self-defense pepper sprays, electroshocker, telescopic batons were sold out.
Everything was sold out?
Everything sold out.
Wow, and now you've got more supply, but is it still in high demand?
Yes, first the suppliers, they manufacture more, but now the situation is not so tragic.
So if you were able to change the law in Germany, how would you change the self-defense law?
I think it should be not so restricted as now. More possibility to choose themselves in which way they can make self-defense.
Absolutely. Well, thank you for talking to us, Pavel.
Thank you.
So even if somebody breaks into your house, you're legally prohibited from protecting yourself. How's that make you feel? I mean, I think it's important to think critically about the words that the news outlets choose in their reporting, because those words will always reveal the bias behind the report. Okay, Monday, 6 Guatemalan men were apprehended on the border near Yuma, Arizona, after jumping an 18-foot fence to get into the United States. 2 of the men were severely injured after they fell off that fence. Now, I've been in Guatemala several times this year, and let me explain something to you. There are bad neighborhoods in Guatemala, for sure. There are bad neighborhoods in every country. But much of Guatemala is actually pretty peaceful, and it's really nice. If these men who jumped the border illegally were really fleeing violence, they could have easily saved themselves a lot of traveling by just moving to a different place in their own country. Like maybe Esquipulas, which I went to earlier this year. It's an absolutely beautiful place, and I wouldn't even hesitate to take my kids there on vacation. Now, unlike Guatemala, Venezuela is falling apart, and it has been for a really long time. It's estimated that 3 million Venezuelans have already fled that country, with more leaving every day. And these are people who have legitimate asylum claims, probably, because the government in socialist Venezuela actively persecutes its citizens, even while many of them are starving. Many Venezuelan dissidents that I speak to here in Panama, and there's tons, would love nothing more than for the United States to oust their president and dictator, Nicolas Maduro. Now, while that idea might have appealed to the Trump administration at one point, it isn't practical and it's not strategic either. It's better to let the corrupt government of one of the world's biggest oil producers collapse under the weight of its own evil and not have to spend a bunch of money and put American lives at risk. And if the Trump administration had any secret plans to invade Venezuela, which they didn't, that idea just got a lot more challenging because on Monday, a flotilla of Russian military planes, including 2 Tu-160 nuclear-capable bombers, just landed in Venezuela. Now, nobody at the Kremlin is saying why, but it's a pretty concerning development for the United States, without a doubt. Now, anybody who's old enough to remember the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis can probably see some chilling comparisons with today's situation in Russia beefing up its presence in Venezuela. Now we have nuclear-capable strategic bombers potentially being based within easy striking distance of our homeland, while Russia engages in some pretty aggressive brinksmanship in the Baltic Sea and in Crimea. It's going to take more than a few angry tweets to defuse this situation, and it's becoming clearer every day that Vladimir Putin is certainly looking to extend his influence and become a global superpower once again. Meanwhile, in the United States, socialism is all the rage with the left. That cute little bartender turned congresswoman, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, has put a fresh face on the idea of socialism, and she seems to think, at least, it'd be a great fit for America. Well, I went to the border of Venezuela last year to find out what those people think of socialism. As Frontlines covered the violent protests that marked the inauguration of Donald Trump January 20th, some of the signs being displayed advocated socialism as the cure for what ails America. We decided to visit a real socialist country to find out if socialism is indeed the cure. This small South American river forms the boundary between Venezuela and Colombia. Since the border was reopened last August, tens of thousands of people have been streaming across this bridge every day in search of food and other essentials. The country they are leaving is not a poor country. It has the world's largest oil reserves, and before the Socialist Revolution of 1999 was a prosperous exporter of coffee and cocoa. 6 years ago, its currency, the bolivar, traded at 4 to the U.S. dollar. But government corruption led to hyperinflation, and today the average Venezuelan earns less than $15 per month. Once the Venezuelans get across the bridge into the little border town of Cúcuta, Colombia, the first thing they have to do is exchange their currency. That's become a real problem. The last time I was here, $1 would have bought about 900 Venezuelan bolivars, but today the exchange rate is 3,000 to the dollar. And that creates a real problem. That means that a month's pay in Venezuela will only buy you about 2 days worth of food, perhaps. And the people here are resorting to selling their jewelry, selling whatever they can to try to raise enough money to live. More than 55,000 people who cross this bridge every day are struggling to make ends meet, and some of them plan never to return. And everyone that we talked to agreed that socialism is definitely a cure worse than the disease. From the Venezuelan border, I'm Chuck Holton. Since I made that piece, Venezuela's inflation rate has now topped 1,000,000% per year. How do you even, I don't know how that even works. And record numbers of Venezuelans are looking to the United States for asylum. They're now in the top 2 of all nationalities that claim asylum in America. Now, how ironic that must seem for them to get here and then to see on the news that these Americans touting the glories of the very system they're fleeing. Well, that's all I've got for today. If you're liking this podcast, would you please do me a favor and subscribe and follow and share it with your friends, because we need to get the word out if we're going to keep doing this. If you really like it, would you join us on our mission to not just make the news, but make the news good? And consider buying me a cup of coffee. It's just $3 a month on Patreon, and then we'll be able to do a lot more good for a lot more people. We got a whole lot more content, too, in store, and some extras that you're not going to get to see anywhere else coming up pretty soon. So thanks for your support, and I'll look for you back again tomorrow on the Hot Zone.
This has been The Hot Zone with Chuck Holton. Produced by Amy Holton. Copyright 2019.